Episode 3 of the Necronama.com is brought to you by Spooky Swirls in Chandler, Arizona. Spooky Swirls is a horror-themed, gluten-free bakery with actual screen-used props on site that you can enjoy while you're there. Working directly with the Horror and Sci-Fi Props Preservation Association, Spooky Swirls will continuously change out the display of props on site so that there's almost always something new to see. In addition, the pastries they offer also change, so there's always something new to try. And don't let gluten-free scare you off, because I guarantee you're going to find something at Spooky Swirls that you like so much, you're never going to question gluten-free again. So if you find yourself anywhere near Phoenix, Arizona, head on down to Chandler. It's well worth the drive to hit up Spooky Swirls. They're doing gluten-free so good, it's scary. I am James Sabata, horror author, screenwriter, and co-host of the podcast you're listening to right now.
And I'm Don Guillory, author, historian, and co-host of the pod as well.
And today we're back to finish up our two-part look at Jordan Peele's movies and the social commentary contained therein. We did Get Out last week, and we're going to hit Us this week. But before we get into that, I have a question for you, Don.
Okay.
So last week you talked a little bit about seeing yourself in Chris, whether it was his good choices, his bad choices, the red flags he's completely ignoring. With the rise in representation in Hollywood, which is still far from fantastic, but a lot better than it's been in the past, how does that translate to horror? It's not a superhero role. You're not seeing yourself as the almighty hero. I understand why that representation is important. I also absolutely understand why representation in horror is important. But number one, how is it different with horror? And number two, would you say that representation as Chris, having that connection with Chris, is the same as having that connection with Red or Adelaide as well? Is that similar to the connection with Chris? And then finally, how has representation overall affected you, this rise in representation?
Ooh, those are some heavy questions to get into this movie. I don't know. As far as the whole idea of representation, it's good to, I guess I'll mix all the answers from those questions into I guess, one continuing answer or response. But as far as seeing the representation or the ability to identify with somebody like Chris or Rod, it's fun because it makes the choices that you kind of intrinsically would have or would want to make, you want to see those manifested on screen because you're understanding the situation, having been in it or at a similar situation. You know, even with where Chris and Rose have the interaction with the police officer, in my head I'm imagining the quote unquote the talk that many young black men have with their parents about what you should be doing. You know, when the police officer stops you, have your ID ready, no sudden movements, yes sir, no ma'am, yes ma'am. So there aren't any problems and nothing can be construed a certain way. So in my mind, I'm thinking, at least with that scene, hey, him giving the police officer makes perfect sense to me because he doesn't want any trouble, doesn't want to have anything pop off. But as far as representation in Us, I think it's done in a different way, in an almost better way. Because in Us, what you start to see is, and even with Get Out, but it wasn't as much of an issue in Get Out, or people weren't at least noticing it as much with Get Out. But the amount of darker complected African American characters So it's not, the safe ones, the guys like me, the safe ones who are of lighter skin and, you can latch on to because you might feel like that percentage of them that is non-black is going to be more accommodating and fun to hang out with, or gives you some type of access. But just in addition to that, the idea that you're showing the beauty of their melanin, you're seeing the beauty of their features. In the case of Adelaide, I forgot the father's name, but Adelaide and her family in Us, to where
it's Gabe.
They're not having to deal with those goofy tropes, those negative tropes attributed to race, those negative cliches. I mean, the dad in the film, he's just a goofy dad. It's not an issue of like, oh, he's a goofy black dad. He becomes a goofy dad when Winston Duke plays that character. As far as getting into the music, or talking to his kids about the music they listen to, or the moment
and justifying it.
Yeah.
Oh no, it's not about drugs.
Yeah.
Just every single line.
Even or getting into or defending his family, where he's talking kind of in that goofy, nerdy voice, but once he sees his family's protected, you have that duality that you have throughout the film. That duality of he has to code switch from being dad and goofy dad to, hey, I'm not going to tell y'all again, get off my property. He puts more bass in it, much more force. And for me, when I saw it, I laughed because I thought about all those times I might have had to code switch at a job or in public. And, you can't allow those two things to be seen at the same time. If with your professional friends, you have to have that professional voice, but with your friends on the side, you can say a lot of things that you wouldn't typically say at work, or have the voice that you wouldn't have at work.
Like the white voice in Sorry to Bother You.
Well, yeah, when that film came out, with Bootsy Collins' film, that whole discussion that comes up, some people got offended by it because they didn't understand what the white voice meant. And really what it was is it was just code switching. If you can tell that I'm a quote unquote black person on the phone and it's in sales, you're going to be less likely to continue on that conversation with me. It's gotten so entrenched in the culture that there have been housing discrimination cases based off of voice, someone calling and saying, I'd like to see this apartment, but they didn't have a quote unquote black voice. They showed up, it was a black person. And as soon as they get there, the property manager says, oh, no, I'm sorry. The person you spoke with was wrong. We actually don't have any vacancies. Or in the case of the housing loans about 10, 15 years ago, some of the interviews that were being done over the phone, when the person disclosed their race, and sometimes when it was done in person, but their race was disclosed as being Latino or Hispanic or black, they ended up getting a higher percentage rate for the loan that they were taking out for the same loan for the same type of house in the same area as white buyers or white borrowers. And it's important to see that in the film because people who aren't exposed to code switching, it might seem a little bit weird. It might seem funny, especially when it becomes addressed directly by saying your black guy voice versus your white guy voice. And in some areas, it's referred to as your hood voice and your work voice. But it's become one of those things that people are now becoming more aware of, to where it can be a joke and it can be this moment of humor, even in a stressful situation, like when Winston Duke's character goes out there with a baseball bat to threaten this group of four mysterious people that have shown up and might be out to do his family harm. But the other thing with respect to representation and getting better, I mean, we're just a couple of years, or I guess 3 years removed from the Oscars So White controversy. And what people were kind of missing within that discussion was it wasn't about all these prominent actors and actresses not being nominated. It was the issue of there were so many that weren't being considered for certain roles. There's this lockout. I don't want to really say lockout, but this idea of being locked out of certain roles because of your background. Viola Davis came to Phoenix a few years ago to speak as part of the Center for Study of Race and Democracy's lecture series. And she said herself, and this is before she won her Oscar, but she was already well known. She had The Help had come out a few years prior. She was doing How to Get Away with Murder. So she had Emmys, she had accolades. And she was saying even though she was taking on a more prominent role with a show like How to Get Away with Murder, she was a lead actress. And of course, most recently, a couple of years ago, she won the Oscar. the idea of her having a lead role in something like a romantic comedy was seen as too far. So she ended up getting a script through her agent, and they said, this would be a great movie for you. It's about, this woman. She's lost her husband through divorce or death. I can't remember what the background was, but she's newly single. She travels to Africa to find herself, meets a man. And so everyone in the audience is thinking, oh, it's how Stella got her groove back. It's just another iteration of that.
That's what I was thinking now, I'll be honest.
And that was all we were thinking about in the audience. And then she drops the bomb on us and says, I got to read most of this script, and then I got in touch with my agent, and they said, oh, yeah, I'm really interested in playing this role. This would be something new for me. And after her agent contacts the production company, they say, oh, no, we want her to be the friend. It's going to be her white friend that goes off to Africa, finds
as all white people do.
Yeah, finds the love of her life, gets this reinvigoration. We want you to be her friend that basically hangs out with her, talks to her, is on the phone, trying to get her through the breakup or the death, and then you see her off the airport, and that's it. And so she basically said, I'm not doing that movie. I'm looking at this as like, you need to see more positive representations of love and romance with people of all different backgrounds, races. You need to have that. And by having me as the funny black friend, that's not going to work for me. So
I'm sitting here and I was rolling my eyes as soon as you said she had to go to Africa. I'm like, why does she have to go to Africa? Just because she's black?
Hey,
and then you tell me that it wasn't even her.
Yeah, that was a remarkable. In fact, when they said the Africa thing, I was like, okay, cool. They're trying to reach out. Maybe this is kind of a nod to Afrocentrism or just this idea of embracing the African diaspora. I was like, okay, well, I'm willing to let that go because they let Adam Sandler do a movie in Africa, and it was what it was. But yeah, it's in my estimation, as far as what I'm seeing, it's getting better, and I love how Jordan Peele addressed this while he was promoting this film. Someone asked him about having a white male lead, and his response was, "I'm not interested in doing that. That movie's been done before." And this was in response to him having Lupita Nyong'o as the lead for this film. I think she became the first female black lead to go over $100 million. It might have been first black female lead of a horror film at $100 million. But either way, she broke through a barrier. And his response was like, I don't need to make those movies. Those have been done. I have plenty of white people in my films, but you're not going to be the lead because it's been done so much. We need to see something new, something different, somebody's story that hasn't been told, or at least a perspective from those stories that have already been told that we haven't heard from before.
So bringing it back to the feeling of representation between the two, is there a huge difference between how you saw Chris on the screen and how you saw Red and Adelaide on the screen? Or is it just you're happy with representation overall? Or talk me through that.
There's a difference that I saw between those two characters, or those three characters. With Chris, I identified with more, and this has to deal with gender dynamics as far as the divider between these two. But I thought Adelaide and Red were much deeper than Chris. I mean, getting into the whole issue of duality, your identity, the idea of us versus them, how do we define who we are? And it's typically not just who we feel we are, but we define ourselves based off of who we're not in a lot of cases. So for Red and Adelaide, for me, I thought they were much better characters. But speaking as a male, I can't really speak to that female experience of one being seen and represented in a positive way, to where you've got that depth of that character and you have that great representation to where throughout the entire film, you're being drawn one way as far as who's the protagonist. And by the end, you realize, holy shit, I was cheering for the wrong person. But then you also kind of feel, you try to justify it kind of based off of that us versus them. You try to justify why you're now okay with this person coming out on top, because, hey, this person was oppressed, they were marginalized, I was cheering for them when I thought this is who they were. but now I'm okay with cheering for them because of the bad stuff that they had to go through, and the stuff that they avoided, because I guess we put them down there and we oppressed them as a society. So when they had their chance to fight back, they did.
So let me bring this back for just a second before we get into all that. So let me try this a different way, because you do bring up a great point with the gender difference. What about Chris versus Gabe? Like, when you see Gabe, you've already said you saw a lot of yourself there. So the whole family is one of, I don't want to say one of the only, but it feels that way. Correct me if I'm wrong. But one of the only representations of a middle-class family, upper middle class probably, in many respects, family who is black. And like you said earlier, darker skinned black as well. And so my question with that is, how's that representation for you with the family in general? Because you don't see that as often.
Well, yeah, in what I've seen, at least in what comes to mind in the last few years, typically there's some struggle. You're working class, you're poor, you're inner city. Sometimes it's, and not to say it's a struggle, but you have an interracial relationship, so you don't have that dynamic of a quote-unquote complete black family or traditional black family, to where you got the mother and the father and then the two kids. And I think the last time that I can recall seeing this was with primetime television, with shows like The Fresh Prince and even further back, The Cosby Show. And even when those were out, there was that discussion of, well, these are fantasies because, black people don't really live like this. And what you had to kind of respond to was, well, yeah, there are black families that live like this. You're just not seeing them. You're not seeing them represented because of the way that they're represented on television and in film. Is typically has some qualifiers, attached to it. They're in college, or they have top college degrees. They're educated, but there's some struggle that goes along with it. But even when you have those black families, you have different hues of skin color that are included, as opposed to, and it's typically lighter as opposed to darker skin. And I even bring this up, the big controversy with the Fresh, not just Denise, but the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air with Aunt Vivian, was the fact that they changed the aunts. I wouldn't even say halfway through the show, but they changed the aunts from a darker skinned aunt to a lighter skinned. And a lot of people did not like that move, where you changed, and there was really nothing better that the second aunt added to the show. And there's been this big fight, or at least this, online or social media fight, and even the memes that came as a result, 20 years later, gosh, longer than that, 20 years after the show's even been off the air, where people are looking at it and saying, like, the first aunt was the best one because she gave a lot of those dark-skinned girls a good role model to have on television, because you never saw her going through something that didn't involve uplifting her family or speaking out on her children's behalf. Because I think there's even one episode where Will and Carlton get stopped by the police and they get put in jail. And she goes right after the police, basically saying, why they should not have done this in the first place. And Uncle Phil has to stop her from blowing the situation up even more to where they might have gotten in trouble. But a lot of people watch the show, love that moment where, she's not letting her husband do it. He eventually is the one who speaks up. But she's not going to go ahead and defer to him to be the one who goes after this first. She's going to do it, give you a piece of her mind, and then he basically pulls her back and then chews out the police officers and lets them know who they're dealing with at this moment. But it going back even further to something like the Clark doll test from the 1930s, Doctors Kenneth and Mamie Clark decided to initiate this test to determine, based off of images that kids were receiving, children in society in general were receiving, how they would attribute good qualities and bad qualities to black people. And they took these two dolls, a white doll and a black doll, and put them in front of children. They used black children in the first
experience. Not just a white
experience.
doll, it was a blonde doll as well.
Yes. And put them in front of these children and asked them these binary questions. Which one's good? Which one's bad? Which one's smart? Which one's dumb? Which one's pretty? Which one's ugly? It was just this straightforward examination of which one you're going to pick. You don't have a choice. Tell me which one, basically which one you've absorbed. And then the question that hit the hardest was, which one looks like you? And the one that they've been pointing to, the dark-skinned doll, is the one that they attribute all these negative characteristics to. And then they have to admit, this is the one that looks like me. And that, gets into that psyche. So they start asking this question in the papers that they're presenting. The question that they asked is basically as part of their research was, if our children are seeing this, they're seeing it because of what we're presenting to them, what we're presenting as ugly or what we're presenting as smart, as dumb, as dirty, as clean. The study itself was so strong and so well received that it was used as evidence in the Brown versus Board of Education decision in 1954. And the justices linked the idea of having segregated schools to creating this mindset, or allowing this mindset to continue on, of racial superiority and racial inferiority, because you have no interaction, or you have a very limited interaction between black and white children.
So we talked a little bit about the middle class family finally being represented. Do you want to walk me through the dual consciousness of their position and how that representation matters as well?
Okay, yeah. And this is just kind of, I guess, a Cliff's Notes version of W.B. Du Bois's theory, double consciousness, which gets into this idea of you have to be both things. If you're black and you're American, but it's almost this issue of you're black or, where these two parts of your identity are fighting against one another, or working against one another. Because the more black you are, the less American you are. And the more American you are, as far as what we attribute to this, the less black you can be. And, there's this idea, and hopefully it's a dying one, within American society, with American society as a whole, of determining what your identity is based off of what somebody else says your identity should be. And there are several moments in the film where this kind of gets brought up. And I guess the best one is with Adelaide and Red, or Adelaide and then Adelaide version 2 or Red version 2. This idea of they switch as children. And when the mother says, "I just want my little girl back," and when you initially watch it, you're just realizing, oh, well, she's talking about, at least from her perspective, she's talking about her child is not talking because she's been through a traumatic situation, and she doesn't know how to deal with it. This is just coping for her. She's not talking. She's shutting down. But when you watch the film as an audience member, you're looking at it as, oh my gosh, that has deeper meaning, because she is not the same person who went into that fun house. And what Adelaide has to do with that whole double consciousness is she has to struggle with the fact that she was one of the tethered, and now she's living above ground as a quote unquote regular person. And every time she's talking about, oh, well, I'm nervous about going here, I don't really want to go back to the beach, it's really that idea of, as the closer she gets to the reality of who she actually is. So she's putting up this front, she's putting up this mask, kind of like her son does. She's putting up this mask on who she is her entire life. And the reality of her life, and at least the tethered showing up, is breaking through that mask that she's built up. So now she has to face the reality that she is two people within one.
So speaking of duality, that is obviously the entire point of Us. Everything in this movie is duality. You have mirror images everywhere. When you get to the rabbits are known for being a symbol of rebirth, which we'll get to, and they're also test subjects, which we'll also get to. You brought up Pluto's mask that he wears, his werewolf mask that usually sits on top of his head, but sometimes it comes down a little. You take that a step further, it's a werewolf mask, and a werewolf in and of itself is duality. Mm-hmm. And I love how these little layers build on top of each other. Like, Peele is so good at adding layers to everything. So then you have the reality of duality, of the doppelgangers literally being there. The neighbors, their daughters are twins. You have two families instead of one that we're sort of following. Mm-hmm. Technically, you have three if you count the neighbors as well. But, you have the doppelgangers and you have the main family. 2 timelines, because we're flashing back to when Adelaide was a child as well as now. You have everything with Michael Jackson, who is obviously known as a huge symbol of duality.
Especially with the timing of when Adelaide goes to, I almost said the sunken place, but she goes to where the tethered are. She's got the Thriller T-shirt. Yes,
I mean, that's that timeline. He was a god. He was untouchable. Like, everybody loved him. Versus how you feel now. That's a duality as well. Whether you're on board with defending him or not. And then you have like the religious vagrant that's out there with the Jeremiah 11:11 sign. 11:11 in and of itself, very dual. You have the 2 ones on either side plus 2 pairs of the one. But my favorite one actually plays off of the Bible verse, and it's a Black Flag t-shirt. So first, there's a Black Flag t-shirt in the 80s when Adelaide's there, and then there's one in the timeline now. And the one in the timeline now, the flag is vertical. Yeah, vertical instead of horizontal. And so it literally, the 4 boxes make another 11:11. Mm-hmm. And I think that's crazy. But my point is, duality is everywhere. Like, Peele's shoving it down our throats, but in a way that works really well. And I find it fascinating that he's able to do that with all the layers, but also making each one work on its own. Like, none of it's there just to be there. It all serves some purpose. And then another duality is the fact that the family is doing very well off, but then there's still second-class citizens to the neighbors that they're trying to keep up with. Gabe's boat is not as good as the neighbor's boat. Things like that. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Oh, yeah.
Keeping up with the neighbors and their amazing use of Siri.
Yes. Siri's failure to do what she should do, which is awesome with...
I think she did exactly what she should have done. But Siri's the real MVP.
What was it, Ophelia or something? What was it?
I believe it is Ophelia, yes.
I know it was something prettier than Siri.
Ophelia, call the police.
Fuck the police. Yeah, the idea of having those 2 families on that same lake or out in the woods on the same lake, and they are living, at least the white family, their white friends, are living a much better life materially. They have a lot more stuff. They've got a much nicer and newer house, better boat. I think they even had like a Land Rover, whereas the Adelaide and her family, they had it wasn't a Volkswagen or Volvo. But even that idea of us and them comes into this, because Gabe has that moment where he's like, oh, he just had to get that boat. Or he had to get that, that idea of, it's their stuff. Why should you worry about it? And it gets into this very American thing, because even when Red comes in and introduces herself and says, oh, we're Americans, everything that those 2 families had been dealing with is very American. The materialism of the 1980s gets revisited in this period, and the idea that, your neighbors, even your friends, not just your neighbors, but your neighbors and your friends, there is this idea or this era of, oh man, I gotta have what they're having, or I gotta have something newer. I gotta have something better. That gets in this whole idea.
The have-nots.
Yeah, it gets in this whole idea of redefining who you are with this us versus them. So if they're doing better than me, I need to do something to show that I'm doing better than them. So even in this goofy dad way, where Gabe goes and gets the boat, it's kind of like, hey, they got a boat, it's a better boat, but I got a boat too, and we're gonna go have fun on the lake too in our boat.
His boat has the best name ever, by the way.
I can't remember. What was it called again?
The Biat?
That's right, the Biat.
One thing I want to add about duality that I was sitting here thinking about once we mentioned the fuck the police part. Ophelia, when she switches songs, cuts off Good Vibrations and starts playing Fuck the Police, which is a duality of California, if you think about it.
Is very indicative of a couple other things. Speaking of songs, the national anthem has been a very interesting topic to engage people with. But I went to a lecture where Jane Elliott was speaking. She speaks out about race and does these workshops about race and racism. I think it's called the Blue Eye Project. But basically, she separates people based off of eye color as opposed to skin color to teach them about race.
Also a fantastic video everyone should go check out. It's on YouTube. I will put it on our social media as well, because the Blue Eye Project, I've made every place I've ever worked that does a cultural competency class show this video, because I think it's that important.
Yes, and she's very deep. I mean, even that short video that might be around, might even be able to get a full lecture of it. It doesn't go into how thought-provoking she is, and even just individually provoking in some cases. But she had this point when she was talking about the national anthem. She said, if you pay attention to the last part of that song, it's telling you all you need to know about America. The land of the free and the home of the brave. And when she was delivering this speech, or at least this piece of her speech and lecture, she was basically making this argument that they're not the same thing. Because we're raised, doing the song and all this stuff in elementary school. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. And she's looking at it and saying, no, it's two different things. You have a section of America that's free, and you have a section of America that we should consider brave just for living here, as far as all the stuff being marginalized, all the stuff that people are putting up with and not being listened to. And you definitely see that in a song like, Good Vibrations versus Fuck the Police, because you're getting a different indication of circumstances and what people are going through in America and what they're seeing. Whereas, that family, they're seeing something different than what Adelaide's family is going to see, or having different experiences than they would have. But since this film is not specifically about race, Jordan Peele's not going to get into that. He's going to get into those nuanced things and kind of the pieces that are going to make you not necessarily scratch your head, but you're going to think about it and look for something that's going to be a little bit deeper to what's going on.
So you were talking earlier about when Adelaide says, "We're Americans." The question she's responding to is, what are you guys? And number one, I found this slightly offensive in the moment, because it's not who are you guys, it's what are you? But the more I've thought about it, I don't really think it was offensive so much as it's more like, are you alive? Are you dead? Mm-hmm. Are you a monster? Are you
clones?
Whatever.
Are you aliens?
But then her response is still, we're Americans. And I can't say it as lovely as she does. But I find that interesting, because I don't think that in some ways American is an answer to who we are. We respond with it. Like, who are you? Oh, I'm an American. I do this. I do this. But being American is very much a what are you, as opposed to a who are you.
Yes.
We use it as a status symbol. We oh, well, in those other countries, blah, 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 blah.
Well, with that whole idea of American itself, when you're talking about, the what is more appropriate to ask as opposed to who, it makes sense, even beyond from what you were saying, it becomes this way of getting into that us versus them. If I'm an American and this is the definition I have for American, it's either, to quote George W. Bush, you're either with us or you're against us. So if you have something that conflicts with what my idea of American is, I'm going to question your loyalty, your identity. I'm not going to be distrustful of you because you're saying you're just like me, but there's all these signs that say that you're different from me. Just like with Adelaide and Red, where they don't look alike. Other than their facial features, they do not look alike. Red's hair is done differently. She has a speech pattern that is very pronounced and choppy. Red, of course, is wearing red. She's got the one glove. She's got the scissors. They've got the sandals. Whereas Adelaide is she's very casual. She's very put together and is fearful of this image of her, or even a reverse image, this mirror image of her, trying to figure out where you fit. And if my answer is wrong, what you're going to do to me, because now you've got this whole family of hers that's captive. If I tell you something you don't like, something bad is going to happen to me.
I also find it a duality thing again, because saying we're Americans, what does that mean? Like, that literally means something different to most people. We all have a generalized idea of what it sort of means, but it's used in society in such a way that people contort it into what they want it to mean. And so I love that she answers with that, because it does say you and me are the same, but it's also, okay, what kind of answer is that?
Well, even with that, this duality, this inside versus outside thing, you get a different response, or at least an interesting response, when you travel at least different parts of the country. Because even with this idea of American, there's the ways that we break it down within domestically. I'm from the South, or I'm from the Northeast, or I'm from the West, I'm from the West Coast, Pacific Northwest, the Midwest, to where people are going to then draw their lines between you and them based off of regional stuff. But, at least internationally, you go somewhere else and someone asks you, where are you from, as opposed to what you are, because there is this understanding that America is not a race of people. America is, a stretch of continents. And if I were to say I'm from the United States, that gives a much better understanding of where I'm from, what interest I might have, that type of stuff. But it doesn't build on this idea of kinship. It helps this idea of identification, or at least narrowing down part of your identity. But it doesn't go any further than that. And even internally, someone, your favorite wrestler were to cheer USA, USA, there's this moment where you kind of question, what the hell does it mean to chant USA in the United States of America? Why would you need to chant that? Or, even in some of the folks who will have... I
just want to send a quick shout out to Brian Hardy, who is laughing his ass off listening to this.
He should be.
Continue.
Hacksaw Jim Duggan lovers have to stick together. But, the idea that you have to wear your identity on a sleeve, or at least on a shirt, in some cases literally on a shirt, or on the back of your pickup truck. For some, if you don't agree with that or you don't like it, you're not American to them. But for Adelaide and Red, it's definitely, at least for me, it's definitely this idea of, I'm going to make you comfortable and uncomfortable at the same moment, because you won't know what to make of what I'm going to say to you.
So another part of American being an identity, I look at how we use it as this way to be a part of something, but then we instantly have to chop it up, like you were saying, So like you take me, when I was growing up, I grew up in Nebraska, okay? So we would have been like, oh, I'm American. And then it would be, I'm from the Midwest. Then it would be, oh no, not Iowa, screw those guys, I'm from Nebraska. Then when you're in Nebraska, it's, oh no, not Omaha, that's crazy, I'm in Lincoln. Then in Lincoln, it's, which high school did you go to? And you just keep chopping it until we're alone, which is so funny to me, because it's this thing that we use for unity, so we don't have to be alone. But it's like human nature to just chop it up until it's gone.
It was crazy. And after I looked at some more notes and went back through all this stuff, it's interesting to think about the way that music is used. And I guess we've talked about other songs and other music that was included. But I got 5 on it when, there's having that discussion. The family's having a discussion about the song. And Gabe is, telling his kids like, oh, no, the song's not about drugs. But anybody who's listening to the song, it's about drugs. It's about going to buy a dime bag. That's why he's saying, I got 5 on it. Let's go half.
I love that he says it's a dope song.
Yes. Let's go half. And what didn't get noticed, or at least what didn't get pronounced in a lot of stuff, but I thought was odd, and I saw the film with my wife, and I looked up and I was like, why is Lupita Nyong'o off beat? Because
very purposeful.
When she's, so when she's awesome. Snapping, she's like, oh, get into rhythm, telling her son, get into rhythm, and she's snapping totally off beat. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe it's just an editing thing. They screwed up or whatever.
Oh, Jordan would never allow that.
Well, no. But then afterwards, you realize she's off beat because she's not the person that, would have been so, talented and following the music and all these other things from an early, as a kid. Because I think she switched at, 10, 11, something like that?
Something like that, yeah. And that actually really upset me because I caught it in the trailer, like one of the first times I watched it. And I was like, so she switched out and she's one of them. And it really kind of just, I don't want to say ruined the movie, because I'm going to explain why I think the ending doesn't work here in a little bit. But it immediately set me up to look for that the entire time I watched the film.
I was looking, based off of Get Out, and I think that was the reason why this one didn't receive as much praise as Get Out did, because so many people went in looking for Get Out Part 2. They went in looking for, okay, well, there's going to be some craziness that's going on. This guy gets sucked in, or okay, now she's going to be getting sucked into the, in the sunken place. All these crazy theories that people had about it. When Jordan was like, no, this is a horror movie. Like, don't look for Get Out. It's not the same film. And some people, they remarked that, they were upset that they weren't getting the same formula. It was great, at least in this sense, to see the film that didn't rely on kind of the same tricks from the first film, or from Get Out. All right, this was something cool that I found from one of the interviews that he did. It was real obvious, scissors are part of that duality. The two pieces make a whole. The same thing with Adelaide and Red. Both of them make that one person. Because they switch.
Share a soul, don't they?
Yeah. Well, Red made that comment. You could copy the body, but you couldn't copy the soul.
Okay.
And that thing like stood out because it you started questioning like, well, where the hell are all these people coming from? Not of course, obviously living underground, but who made them? Why do they exist? What purpose do they serve? And at what point did they all decide, other than Red's narration, at what point did they all decide we're getting the hell out of here and we're going to take over the outside world, the outer world? But in one of his interviews, he talks about the scissors and the whole idea that there are several things that he used to explain duality, the whole idea of making the clones, making those copies because those two people work together, they share a soul. But the scissors themselves are representing that untethering because if you don't have those two pieces of the scissors work together, you can't cut anything.
You could stab some people, but it's definitely not going to work as well.
No, not by themselves. And Jordan Peele said one of the reasons that the rabbits, at least in the film, or rabbits to him, are just so creepy is they represent that duality as well. You've got breeding, or at least the breeding of themselves, or breeding experimentally or scientifically, but then they also represent experimentation. And that's what you have with the tethered. They're there breeding, but then there's also this piece of experimentation with them. And what was really cool was he said that rabbits for him also represent this duality with cute and creepy. And he threw in something in one of his interviews where he said, the creepiest part to me is that their ears look like scissors. With the way that they'll flip and flap back and forth. They look like scissors. So it was like, it was just extra creepy for him. But you were going to say something about experimentation.
The more I've thought about it, the more it is so reminiscent of how we ignore slavery.
Yes.
And so we purposely ignore who put them there because those people are gone. That's not us. I don't owe you anything for that. Just the same way that we ignore who brought slaves over. They're all just abandoned where they were put. When they come up, there's that whole you need to go back down kind of thing, which is very reminiscent to me of go back to where you came from. Mm-hmm. And the entire thing, the experiment as they call it, basically to me just mirrors so much of slavery and how everything started and how we just ignore it now. You add in the breeding and the experiment that you were just talking about, and that's always been part of slavery. The more children you have, the more children I can sell. The more the stronger you are, the more I can make you work. And the stronger survive, so then they breed, and then, the genes are better. That whole concept to me is the same as what's going on with this experiment that was abandoned. Because eventually we abandoned slavery, but we didn't do anything about it. We didn't help anybody get back to where they came from. We didn't make it up to them in any way. Reparations are this constant thing that white people are just like, we shouldn't have to give people money. That's ridiculous. I didn't own slaves. I didn't bring you here. Why do I have to give you money?
And now we're going to go to our plantation wedding.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, man. And, or I'm going to go on a tour of a plantation, but I don't want to hear how slaves built it.
Well, or you have Confederate monuments all throughout, not just the South, but that ignore what the fight was about and then honor the people that were fighting to preserve the institution itself while ignoring all these things. Even the lens that we give something like slavery in the Confederacy or even the antebellum South is through this rose-colored lenses, and I hate that. If I were to classify it as a horror film, I would probably say this is the film I fear the most, Gone with the Wind. I will never watch that film because, one, as a historian, I look at it and say the film is complete bullshit. And then two, it's worse because it enhances this idea of the South being this genteel society where everything was fine until, them damn Yankees came south. But yeah, it becomes this moment where you have the duality, not just with slavery, but with slaves themselves or enslaved people themselves, where you talk about the strength, but then you also talk about their weaknesses. Oh yeah, they're really strong, but they're not that smart. But we better not let them read because they'll get too smart and they'll do something to us.
Ooh, you're coming up on why I don't like the ending of this movie.
But yeah, it's one of these things that you look at, and I'm glad that you brought up the slavery thing, because it is all about ignoring what took place and then not wanting to pursue any knowledge to find out what took place because you're so comfortable in that ignorance. It is that blissful ignorance with it. All right, James, you've been telling me for 2 weeks that you hate the ending to this film, but you've never really given me any indication why. Why do you not like the end of this film? I thought it was appropriate, to at least fit in with the film, at least from my estimation, fit in with the film. But why do you not like it?
So let's start with the fact that I love twists. I know they're overplayed. I know everybody's like, oh, what's the twist of this movie gonna be? And it's the twist that bothers me in this. I get why people enjoy it. Here's why I don't. If you take this twist that at least some of us were expecting, I think without it, the movie becomes way stronger. Basically, with the twist, Adelaide or Red, whichever you want to go with. So they switched places, and now she's above ground, and she's built this family, and she's done all these other things. And then when she goes underground to start fighting back, she devolves into the monsters that are around her. And she's growling, and she's not speaking as well, and she's angry, and she's doing all this stuff. And the reason that I don't like that is I think it would be so much stronger if the 100% human did the same thing. If the 100% human is devolving into the same thing as these monsters down there, that's powerful. And when it's the twist, and it's the monster that rose up and then goes back to be a monster, I think that kills it. To me, that's the same as when we say, well, the underclasses deserve their station because we're not the same. They're not like me, and they can't get to my level. There's something inherently different about us. I also don't like how you said that the soul can't be replicated, because so much of history is white people going, they don't have souls. It's fine. They're not like us. So I feel like all of that devalues the ending that we should have had, where this 100% human goes down and devolves into the exact same kind of monster that's down there. And I just don't like how it works instead.
Okay. I don't have a problem with that. See, I was thinking at least a different hatred of the ending. At least the way that you voiced your hatred but did not explain it to me. Because I was thinking that you were talking about the other twist, which is the one that I like. And that has to deal with the son. It's that big question of, is he untethered as well, or part of the tethered now untethered as well? Or is it simply this moment where the son sees his mom, because he was down there, sees his mom who had gone through all this, fighting back and trying to escape from underground. He knows who she is now, and it's kind of like, I'm putting this mask back on, that werewolf mask on, and I'm going to keep your secret. Trying to give her the wink wink, or, oh shit, I'm not going to mess with this woman because she's not really my mom. I'm not going to tell anybody because if she knows that I know, then she's probably going to kill me. So for me, it just seems
she is his mom.
Well, no, it just seems so ambiguous as far as what's going on. I thought it was a cool way to acknowledge that somebody else knew, but not to the depths of what they knew.
Well, and I think it's kind of that thing that we all have at some point in our lives, whether it's my current 4-year-old who thinks I'm a superhero and one day she's going to find out that I'm not perfect, whether it's when you're a teenager and you start realizing hey, my parents did some fucked up shit. Or if it's when you're an adult and you start seeing other sides of people you've known your whole life or whatever else. It's that duality once again. With Pluto doing that, where he looks at her and he's just got that look that I can't even explain. But for me, it's like he sees all the truth and then he puts the mask down because it's like, what do I do with this information? And then she kind of looks at him and she's got that little smirk. And I think that she kind of just got this new bond with him because she went through something similar around his age, where she had this secret that she couldn't tell anybody. And I don't know, I find the whole ending, that part of the ending, amazing. There you go.
Okay, so we agree on that part of the ending was good.
Sure. No.
Yeah.
I don't dislike the ending. I just feel like in Get Out, I wanted that other ending that we talked about last week. And then we got the ending that was so much better. And I feel like in this one, I got that ending that I shouldn't have gotten instead of the one I should have. And I love the idea of the 100% human devolving into a monster instead.
Well, I haven't seen anything about, an alternate ending for this film, but it would be really interesting if Jordan Peele had shot that. Because even with Get Out, I was expecting the ending where the police showed up and either arrested or shot him, or shot Chris. I was okay with the ending that they went with because that was much more reassuring. And I saw Get Out probably about 3 times in a theater setting. One was an academic film Q&A where we watched it, discussed about different issues that come up in the film. And I'm sitting there waiting the entire time because I know about the alternate ending. Everyone that's in that audience, I think there were about 200 or 300 people that were there from different walks of life, different age groups, backgrounds. And you just hear this audible gasp when the lights hit because everyone in the room is thinking like, here we go again. He's about to become a hashtag. When Rod shows up, there's this great relief that all this tension comes out where everyone is relieved that Chris has been saved. He's not going to die. His friend is able to track him down, found him, and of course did what every friend would do in that situation, which is
made fun of him.
Yeah, make fun of him, and the whole I told you not to come up here, man.
And I think that is one of the biggest differences between the two movies. There's this massive tension relief in that moment. Everything, like everybody's buttholes were puckered, and they were scared to death Chris was going to get shot. And then instead we get this laugh. And that's a huge tension relief. Whereas in Us, we get that smirk and that look between mother and child. And I think that is one of the biggest differences. But that is also what Jordan Peele does magnificently. I talk a lot about how humor and horror have a lot in common. Both are basically a building of tension and then tension relief. They're both visceral responses. They're just extremely different. One is trying to get you to laugh, and one's trying to get you to scream. People don't understand, one, how easy it was for Jordan Peele to move seamlessly between comedy and horror. Even if you just watch Key and Peele, you see it on there. But two, that not everybody can do it. You have to be able to control tone, and that's what Peele does so well. Even in the ending I don't like as much, the tone is amazing. And his ability to walk that line and hold on to you is just fucking light years ahead of so many other people. And so that's another duality right there, horror and humor, and being able to be both and be one. So I guess that about wraps things up for our look at Jordan Peele's movies. Next week we're going to be back looking at The Purge, and joining us will be author, screenwriter, producer, cigar aficionado, Golden State Warriors fan, sexy motherfucker, Vincent Cava, and he's going to talk about The Purge with us. So I am James Sabata.
And I'm Don Guillory.
We hope to see you next week when we just go fucking nuts, because there will be no rules.